Hi, and welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. 365 means I'm going through the Bible in 365 days. So I'm reading through the Bible from start to finish, and I'm reading through it chronologically. So I'm using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan. If you want to join me and kind of read along with me as I'm doing these readings and giving you my thoughts on the readings. So you would find this reading plan on the 1 year chronological Bible online, and it is a free download. So you can download that and you can just read along using your own Bible, or they actually offer Bibles. They sell a few different versions. If you wanted to purchase your own Bible and then just sort of go along by reading, opening every day, they have a new reading every day. And so it's easier to follow along for sure, but it also is, there's a fee. So take your choice if you want to read along with me. I would love for you to read along with me. If you have never been with me before, my main reason in doing this is to encourage people to read their Bible. So yes, I'm giving a commentary on what I'm reading. So yes, once I read it, I'm sort of going to give a brief explanation of the things that happen, why I think they happen, how it's relevant, right? And then sometimes how it hits me or my life. But my hope is not that you'll just listen to me. Like you're not just going to kind of, what is it, armchair quarterback or whatever. You're not just going to sit and listen to me and sort of critique or judge what I have to say, but you are going to read it yourself. And then this is sort of just an extra. Maybe it helps you with a deeper understanding of what the text says, or maybe you just get a different perspective. So maybe my perspective might look a little bit different than your perspective. And so I am in the book of Numbers, which means we have already done the book of Genesis, the book of Job, the book of Leviticus. The book of Exodus, the book of Leviticus, and now we're into the book of Numbers, and we're near the end of this. And so to remind you of who we're dealing with and who we're speaking to, Moses is our main character, so to speak. And he has, through the power of God, he has brought the Israelites up and out of slavery. So they were slaves for about 400 years. And he lifted them up and out of slavery through the power of God's miracles with the Egyptian people. It was time to let the people go. And so they have come up out of slavery. They moved to the base of Mount Sinai, and there Moses spoke to God, and in speaking through God, God revealed all of these commandments and all these declarations to the people, things that he wanted them to do to be a people that are set apart and holy, so they are uniquely different from the rest of the world. And part of it was to show that God is uniquely different than any other being in this world, that this is the God that created the world, and then this is the God that saved these people through his miracles. And now these people are going to follow him by doing things differently than the rest of the world. So I want to be clear that the rest of the world looked one way. And at that time, they didn't look the way that these Israelites look. So it wasn't a matter of just sort of formulating rules to mesh with the world as it was. It was actually taking them out of the world as it was, because everybody sacrificed, right? So at that time, what we see in many areas is that people were sacrificing animals and even people and babies and things like that to gods. But the holy God made it separate. It wasn't. It was a different sacrifice. It was for a purpose to be holy and clean in God's eyes. So to find favor with this God, not just to get this God to do tricks for them. And so these people are uniquely set apart, and they look very, very different from the rest of the world, which is why people were starting to bug out a little bit, because they didn't look like everybody else. And then they were slowly starting to take over this area. And so God brought them, he promised them the land of Canaan. He actually promised Abraham way back when, several hundred years before they were enslaved. He promised Abraham the land of Canaan. And now he had promised them through Abraham, he had promised Abraham's descendants. So the tribe of Israel, the 12 tribes, were Jacob's descendants. They were his 12 sons, and so including Joseph's 2 sons. And so they were promised the land of Canaan. They looked into the land of Canaan when they first got there, and they said, it is way too scary for us. These people are really big, and the city is really fortified, and so we won't be able to get in. And then God punished them, and he said, this generation, because of their fear and their complaining, they are all going to die. We're going to wander in the wilderness for the next 40 years. They're all going to die out. And then when that happens, when there is a new time and the time that they are ready, God is going to bring these people back to the land of Canaan, and he's going to bring them in. And I'm giving you that little synopsis because it is now that time. So Moses is in some ways passing the baton over to Joshua. So Joshua has been promised as the next leader of the Israelite people, but he's not what Moses was. So um, Moses was a leader, and he also spoke to God. He was sort of the voice of God to these people. Aaron was a priest, so he went into the tabernacle and spoke with God, but Moses spoke to God essentially face to face, not literally face, but Moses was able to be in God's glory and to see God. Uh, Joshua will not have that privilege. Joshua will always go to Eleazar, who is Aaron's son, and he will deal with a priest, and the two of them will essentially come to decisions together. Joshua will ask questions, and then Eleazar will consult the Urim, and the Urim will say God, what God's decision is, and then that will be relayed to the people. So we are passing the baton. As we are passing the baton, we're being reminded of a lot of the things that they are still doing as they go into the land of Canaan. These are a lot of the things that they're still going to have to follow. So this is where we're sort of landing in Numbers 30. It was a big synopsis today, but giving you an overall picture. So we're in Numbers 30, and it starts out right away by saying, Moses said to the heads of the tribes of Israel. So now Moses was speaking to Joshua, and now Moses is speaking to the heads of the tribes of Israel. So he's reminding them of the heads of the tribes of Israel are in charge of the people. So he elected these elders several chapters back. He elected these elders, and these elders are in charge of their clans or their people. And so as we've been sort of recognizing, or as I've been recognizing, as I've been going through this, there is a lot of responsibility. The people in charge seem to be more responsible than the people. So the heads of the families, and then the heads of the clans, and then the heads of the areas, right? And then the priests that come in to the temple. So all of these people have this great responsibility. Moses and Aaron had an even greater responsibility. So everybody shared in this responsibility over the people, over just your sort of general Israelites. And so he's speaking to the tribesmen, the heads of the tribes of the clans, so then they can remind their people group, right? Because this is over like 1.5 million people. This isn't, a local community where there's only 200 people, maybe 600 people, maybe even up to 1,000 people. This is over 1 million people. That's a lot of people to care for. So they needed other people in charge. Anyway, so Moses is speaking to the heads of the tribes of Israel. This is what the Lord commands when a man makes a vow. So he's talking about what it looks like to make a vow to the Lord. So you go in, and we've seen a couple of the vows at this point. They can promise their homes to them. There's that Nazirite vow, if you guys remember, where they would shave their heads, right? And so that then they wouldn't drink any wine or even be around any grapes, anything like that. So we saw some of the vows that they make. And so when they make a vow, there's an importance there. It's not sort of like, oh, I promise to do this. It's not that minor, right? Or it's not a pinky swear, as we would sort of say in our generation. This is something that's really a big deal. You're making a promise to the Lord that you will give or do or behave in some way. And so this is to be taken really seriously. So when you make a vow or a promise to the Lord, it is to be kept. And if it is not to be kept, there are punishments that ensue and things that have to be done. So if you make a vow, there are, again, remember I said there's the tribes and the heads of the clan, and then there's sort of like the people underneath. If you are one to make a vow, you must keep that vow. If you are obligated, and you must do it, right? So in verse 2, it's just really basic. In verse 2, it says, when a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he must not break his word must do everything he said. But when a young woman does it, so now we have stipulations. When a young woman does it and she's living in someone's household, so say she's living in her father's household, if she does it and her father can release her from this, so she may make a vow and her father may not agree with that vow. And so he has the power to say that she doesn't have to honor this vow, and she's able to get out of the vow. Also, if a husband, right, it's the same thing. So if she's living in someone else's house and they know the vow and they want to come and they want to say something about it, they are able to. So in verse 5 it says, if her father forbids her when he hears about it, none of her vows or the pledges by which she has obligated herself will stand. The Lord will release her because her father has forbidden her. But if she marries, then she will obligate herself. So once again, I think that we're coming to a community that is, uh, while it feels, because of the generation that we live in, while it feels like someone else is controlling us, and it may seem that way in certain senses, especially because we don't like to be told what we can or can't do. And especially if we're the one who makes a promise, right? If I make the promise and then someone says, no, they're not able to do that. I've made that promise. And so I want to kind of fulfill that promise. But they are in a position of protection over the females in their family, in their clan, and in their tribe, right? So there's a sense of responsibility and protection for the males in their household to care for the females in their household. So obviously the goal is that the man who is, let's say, forbidding the woman from taking this vow is doing it for the good of her and not to the detriment of her. Maybe she did this vow, she wasn't thinking clearly, she did it quickly without consulting anyone first, right? So for whatever, maybe she didn't realize that it's not going to be good for her. So for whatever reason she made that vow, if it is not approved by the male leader in her household, then she has been forgiven that. So it's not even saying that she's not allowed to do it. It's essentially saying she is able to not do that vow anymore. So, all right, I want to read 13. Verse 13 says, let's see, her husband may confirm or nullify any vow she makes or any sworn pledge to deny herself. But if her husband says nothing to her about it from day to day, then he confirms all her vows or the pledges binding on her. He confirms them by saying nothing to her when he hears about them. So he is just as responsible. So when he finds out about the pledge, he is responsible to either say yes or no to the pledge. And if he doesn't say anything, we're confirming that that's a yes. And so she's able to follow through on her pledges. All right. So, and then it says, and even on top of that, it says, if, however, he nullifies them sometime after he hears about them. So this is sort of like an on top of it. So if he hears about it, says nothing, and then at one point later, he says, you know what, I want to nullify this. He has to bear the consequences of any of her wrongdoing. So if she breaks the vow, because she's breaking the vow, right? He says to her, you got to break this vow. And because she breaks the vow, he then bears the consequence of her wrongdoing. So again, this is about responsibility. It's not about lording power over, but it's about taking responsibility for someone else's actions. Because he is deemed the head of the household, he's the one who has to take the responsibility and bear the burden for any punishments that may incur because of that. All right, moving on to Numbers 31. So reading, going in verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites. After that, you will be gathered to your people. So just a couple of things. The Midianites, if you remember, they were just living over in that land, or they're sort of still living over in that land. And the Midianite women have drawn the Israelite men in and are having relations with them that God does not approve of. And so God is there's punishment for that. And so the Midianites are going to be punished for drawing them away from the one true God, because there's always responsibility in both parties, because the men, if you remember, they suffered a plague from it. And actually, I shouldn't just say the men, the whole community of the Israelites suffered a plague from it. And now Moses has been told to go out and to go to war with the Midianites. It also then says, following it, then Moses will be gathered to his people. And so this is another expression for he's going to die. So he's not going to live much longer after this, but this is sort of his one thing that God has asked him to do before that happens. All right, so I want to go to verse 7. Well, let's say verse 5. Moses sent them into battle, 1,000 from each tribe, along with Phinehas. Remember, Phinehas is the one who kind of put the spear through not kind of, but he literally put the spear through the Midianite woman or Moabite woman, I'm not sure which it was, and an Israelite man who walked right in front of the tent of meeting with this woman. And so he's the one who took them, and he took articles of the sanctuary and the trumpets for signaling. Verse 7, they fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man. So they killed every male Midianite in that area. And then they saved the women and children, and they plundered the area. So if I move to verse 15, because it says 14 says, Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commander of thousands and commander of hundreds, who returned from battle. It says, have you allowed all the women to live? They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the people. So this is the Balaam that we saw not that long ago that couldn't curse the people. And now it seems like he has convinced the Midianite women to have relations with the Israelite men. So it looks like he's sort of turned away from God as he was following him there, because God said, say only what I want you to say. And then it sort of looks like he's turning away from God, and then he wound up dying because of it. So he's one of the ones that gets punished. Because it says they also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with a sword. So he died in this war. And so as awful as this looks and as awful as this feels, they do kill the women that were part of this. So the only women that they saved were the women that were not with any men. So again, we're going to verse 15. It says, kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. So these women are now going to be in the Israelite community, and they are going to be given to the Israelite men in the community. And I'm sure, as you can kind of hear my tone if you're listening, this is really hard to hear. This is hard to listen to, because you're killing everyone in their family, and then you're taking these women and you're bringing them into your community. And so it's hard. I know I've on many occasions sort of wanted to excuse God and say, well, the Israelite community is better than the community they lived in. It doesn't necessarily say that. And so I don't want to add in anything that isn't really there. The reality is these people were turned away from God, and God deems that is not okay. So again, one of the things that I think is true of God is, even when we are turned away from him, he is really, really, really patient with us, but he's not patient with us forever, right? So there's a time, and I would say as soon as possible, where you want to turn towards the Lord and stop turning away from the things that he deems to be evil and wrong and against him. And you want to turn towards him. You want to be a follower of him and not away from him, because being a follower of him is where the blessings come, right? His light will shine on you. He will show you his face. He will be with you, right? Those things you want. You want the God that created the universe to be with you. You don't want the God that created the universe to be against you, because you have turned your back on him and have not accepted the truth of who he is. And so, as hard as these things are to hear, the reality is it's the people's choice to turn towards him or to turn away from him. And when you turn away from him, there are consequences to be had from turning away from him. In this instance, unfortunately, it is that all of their people die except young women. And those young women will be taken and embraced by the Israelite community, because remember, once you're in the community, you're no longer a foreigner. If you remember, they treat the foreigners as equal. You follow with the same rules. You are treated in the same way. You make the same offerings to the Lord. And so you are treated in the same way as the rest of the community is. So they will be in the community. They will be treated as if they are part of the community, and they will be loved and honored and treated well. But they will not be with their families anymore. So it's just sort of a hard pill to swallow. And it sounds like what God did is unjust. But the reality is that it is not, because he is a just God. So after this happens, they take all the spoils that they got from there, and they are going to divide the spoils. And so what they do is they divide them in two different ways. They split all the spoils in half, and the first half goes to Moses and Eleazar and his family. And so they get the spoils, and they get one out of every 100. So here, let me make it really literal. So what I want to do is read verse 32. So in verse 32, it says, the plunder remaining from the spoils that the soldiers took was 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 women who had never slept with a man. This is huge. This is massive amount of spoils. The half share of those who fought in the battle was 337,500 sheep. Tribute for the Lord was 675. So 1 out of every 100 was a tribute to the Lord. 36,000 cattle, of which the tribute of the Lord was 72. 30,500 donkeys, of which the Lord was 61, and 16,000 people, of whom the tribute for the Lord was 32. So these were given to Moses and Eleazar. So it says in verse 26, you and Eleazar, the priests and the family heads of the community, are to count all the people and the animals that were captured. Divide the spoils equally between the soldiers who took part in the battle and the rest of the community. Right? So the soldiers get half, spoils go to them, the rest of the community gets half. In verse 41, it says, Moses gave the tribute to Eleazar the priest as the Lord's part, as the Lord's commanded. And then the half belonging to the Israelites, right? The ones that didn't go to war, right? So the half belonging to the Israelites, obviously was the other half of that. But more of it then goes to the Lord, and this actually goes to the Levites. So instead of, I think, 1 out of every 500, it's 1 out of every 50. So it's significantly more that goes to the Levite people, obviously, because the Levites are a bigger, massive amount of people, and so they need more of the tribute to go to them. And then the Israelite people didn't go to war, so they don't get as much of the tribute as the rest of the nation does. The soldiers that went to war. So when I read verse 48, which I'm coming down to the bottom here. Verse 48, it says that the officers who were over the units of the army, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, went to Moses and said to him, your servants have counted the soldiers under our command, and not one is missing. So no Israelites died in this battle. They took over and killed all of the Midianite men and women that had been with men. It says in verse 50, so we've brought an offering to the Lord, the gold articles each of us acquired, armlets, bracelets, rings, earrings, and necklaces, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord. So they're making atonement for the killing of those people. Even though it was by the Lord that asked them to do that, there's still I want to say, dirtiness in it. So it's not clean that they've killed. And so they have to make atonement. And remember, they have to do all of the rituals in order to be back inside the community. That's where we finish it up today. So everyone going to war, and then we're going to move on tomorrow into more of the book of Numbers. Again, sort of more of like the finishing touches that Moses is putting on before we move into Deuteronomy. If you like this, I want you to hit the like button, share it, subscribe to the channel. I should have a little subscribe button on there so you can subscribe to the channel nice and easy at this point. So these videos will come up for you. Remember, there is one every single day. So every day. But before you watch these videos, I would love for you to at least listen, if not read, all of the chapters that are in there. And so you can kind of keep reading in your Bible and gleaning an understanding of who God is. So I will see you next time. Keep reading.